I'm applauding all of you. You fill my heart, all of you being here. So I'm not even nervous. And I've never spoken before a group of people like this. A little louder?
Louder, yes.
Okay. So with that, it's been an interesting process, recalling my whole life. Can't recall just a few minutes ago with Tara, something she said and it was gone. So here we go. I was born in 1942 in the Bronx, New York, in a neighborhood called Pelham Parkway. Ann Iris Rappaport, better known as Mikhail Dancer, lived 1 block away from where I did. So, my parents were Jewish. My father was born in 1906 in Brooklyn, New York, and he graduated from New York University. My mother and her family, my Bubby, which is grandmother, my Zadie, which is grandfather, were born in a town called Vishnevitz in the country of Ukraine. They were poor, and the Jewish people were persecuted to such an extent that my grandfather decided to leave for New York, where one of his relatives lived. He was able to find work, and over the next years saved enough money so he could send for his family. When the family left, my mother was 4 years old and had never met her father. It took my mother and Bubby almost 3 years traveling by foot from village to village, sleeping in barracks until they finally arrived to take the boat to Ellis Island in New York. When the boat finally arrived, my grandmother said to her husband, said to my mother, she said to my mother, Bubby said to my mother, listen, you stay here because your father is coming and he may come here to see me, but I'm going to go look for him. So the next moments, my mother hears somebody calling out my grandmother's name. So they walked over to each other, and she said to him, she said, who can I say is looking for her? And he said, I'm her husband. And she looked at him and said, and I'm your daughter. She was 7 years old when they met. Anyway, I was blessed to have grown up in a loving family. By the way, when they got here, they only spoke Yiddish. They didn't speak any other language. That was their language, which is an Eastern European Jewish language. So I was blessed to have grown up in a loving family. There were many hugs and plenty of love for me and my brother, who was 7 years older than me. So now you know where I get my hugging from. I got it a lot from my father. So fast forward, 1958, I'm 16 years old, and my best friend, Gary, on Friday nights, we used to get together and go out in the neighborhood and meet with a bunch of kids, because there were so many kids in this neighborhood. We were all teenagers. And we'd go meet on the avenue and hang out and stuff like that. So Gary says to me, he says, listen, do you want to smoke some pot tonight? So I looked at him and said, sure, why? What's happening? He said, well, there's a bunch of kids getting together tonight in Bronx Park, which was only a few blocks away from where we lived. And Bronx Park was a huge park in New York. And they're meeting, and there were no lights, and they're meeting at the handball court. Okay, so we get to the handball court. There must have been 40 kids there passing joints around in 58. Uphill. So we had the best time. I remember what the feeling was. We left the park. I was walking on the avenue. I felt like my feet weren't even on the ground. And that's what that experience was. Floating on air. Moving on, I went to college for a year and decided to leave school. I got my first job earning $50 a week when I was 22. I met Eileen, and after 6 months, we were married. That's Eric's mother. In 1967, we had our first child. Right there.
It was nothing.
Our second child, named Beth, was born in 1969. During this period, I was offered a position by two brothers who owned a small cosmetic company called Andrea. The business was growing rapidly, and I was in a key position to grow with it. In the 8 years of my employment, I was the main person working closely with the owners. Everything went through me. I was responsible for purchasing, importing, exporting, had 200 employees and 5 supervisors reporting to me. We were the first company manufacturing, listen to this, false eyelashes. Huh? You know about false eyelashes? Is that a riot? I designed many styles that you can see today in Nordstrom's. Yeah. You believe that? And we had other cosmetics. You could walk. I sometimes came home, I had 7 different shades of eyeshadow on my hand. And anyway, eventually the brothers sold the business to the company called Lanvin. And they were subsequently bought out by Squibb, the pharmaceutical company. And the 2 brothers were grooming me to become the head of the Andrea division, which was a great business opportunity for me. In the midst of all this, Eileen and I were living a hippie lifestyle with 2 young children. We smoked pot and experimented with other substances. Rock and roll music was exploding, and we were listening to performers like Dylan, the Grateful Dead, the band, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Neil Young, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, Leon Russell, and the list goes on and on. These were the days of the Vietnam War, and Eileen and I were protesting at local protests and eventually traveled to Washington, D.C. to be a part of the 1 million-person march against the war. As the years went on, Eileen and I were drifting apart, and we finally parted ways after 18 years of marriage. And I will say, some of those years were beautiful. And let me see if I got my sequence. Bear with me 1 second. something I left out, just like you did the other, you know. It's all right, it's not important. I'm gonna move on, okay? Oh, okay, this was the important thing. Where did I put that? So, okay. So Eileen and I wanted to leave New York. We had our eyes set on coming to California. So we had a decision to make. What am I going to do about my employment opportunity? And I resigned. She and I bought a camper, not like a Winnebago. It was a yellow van. You could sleep in it. And she and I and Eric and his sister got in the van and traveled to Santa Barbara, California, where Eileen's sister lived. We took 3 months getting there and visited very beautiful places on the way. Okay, so I wanted to specify that. Oh, there's another thing. I'm just remembering this. So the first year that we were living there, I wasn't working. I didn't have to work. We had a few $1,000s saved up, and you know, money was much different back then. And Eric and his sister, we put them in. We didn't want to put them in the public schools, and we had read the book, Eileen and I, Summerhill. And anybody remember the book Summerhill? Okay, so we heard about this place called the community school that was up in the hills in the mountains, run by a commune called Sunburst Farms. Okay, and there was a free school up there called the community school. It was on 100 acres of land. We were going to a meeting, Eileen and I, to meet parents, teachers. We got to the land. We tell people this is what we're here for. She said, oh, go up there. You'll see some teepees on the right, and you just go follow that. Okay, so we go in, and the meetings are being held in this teepee. All right. And Eileen and I are sitting there and listening to it. And then when we get out, we said to each other, boy, this place sounds great. Then we go into, they have where the school studies are going to happen and so on. And there wasn't too much studying going on there. My daughter Beth, they had horses there. She was riding horses for a while up there on the land. Eric, on the other hand, there weren't too much academic studies going on there, but his teachers taught him how to play chess. By the time he left the school, none of the teachers could beat him. So that's what he got out of school. Okay. Good memory? Yes, okay. Okay. Where am I now? I just Santa Barbara. Okay. So then, you know, Santa Barbara was fabulous in those days. And we went to you could go to a concert there, 5 minutes away from where we live, walk there. It costs nothing to get in and see the greatest performers that we're talking about here. You know, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Bob Marley, this one, that one, Van Morrison, they all came there because that's where the stop-off was for Santa Barbara. Anyway, fast forward. Mikhail's living in the Santa Cruz area of Northern California. One day I heard on the news that there were severe mudslides in the area where Mikhail lived. I had her phone number and called out of concern for her well-being. That renewed our friendship, and soon thereafter we started dating. since I was still living in Santa Barbara, we would meet on weekends at romantic places like Cambria, Monterey, Carmel. I knew I was falling in love with her. Mikhail had not been in a monogamous relationship for quite some time. She was loosey-goosey. One day, I saw on the front cover of New Age Journal the feature article called High Monogamy. With the magazine in hand, I visited Mikhail and made my case for us. As long as our relationship was monogamous, she agreed, and we decided to follow a path using our relationship as spiritual growth. I moved up to live with Mikhail and her daughter Harmony and hoped that we could bring our two families together. Now I had to throw this in. Okay. This is during the 70s and 80s. I read Be Here Now. What do I know from Be Here Now? But I wasn't into him when he was with Timothy Leary. I got into Ram Dass from the book. I read the book. There was something that hit me, and I just locked into it. Subsequently, Stephen Levine, who became another teacher of mine and a friend of mine, he had stopped off with a group of people in Santa Barbara. I don't know how he got to me. And we were sitting in the kitchen together, Stephen, myself, and a few other people. My mother had sent for the holiday a honey cake. I didn't know what to do with it. I took out the honey cake. We ate the honey cake, and he was going off to teach his first retreat up in the Santa Cruz area. I went to that one. There were about 50 people there, and that was the beginning of his death and dying retreats, which I then went to many of them. And he became my really primary, go-to for my spiritual life. I somehow connected with Stephen in such a way. I connected with Ram Dass too, but Ram Dass, all of a sudden he became, he was this huge figure to millions and millions of people all over. Stephen wasn't. And he Elizabeth Kubler-Ross asked him, to come teach meditation to her dying patients. And he did. And he was with a few thousand people who had died. So he got firsthand experience that he was able to bring into his teachings. Stephen was brilliant, but he had a heart of gold, One time, I remember one retreat up in Brighton Bush. He was positioning himself out on the land, sitting on a cushion. Come and be with him. Just two of you, whoever wanted to come, and tell him anything that you feel like giving up. He would have people come to him who committed murder, and they would tell him they were living with it. How he dealt with that in a compassionate way, I don't know. I wasn't there, but he was quite an extraordinary person to be able to open up to that. And then, so I went to a lot of retreats. They were great. And then I had an opportunity, this in the early years of our marriage, to meet Jack Cornfield. And Jack, this is before Spirit Rock. And Jack was, he had a meditation class in Fairfax Community Church, in Fairfax here. Maybe there were about 50 people that would come to that. And then, so one day I hear that he's also a practicing psychologist. So I went up to him and I said, Jack, you have room for, me? I want to come see you as you're a psychologist, right? He said, sure. So the next 2 years, I used to go to his house once a week, and we would talk about stuff. And just to give you just one story, I would come in there and I tell, say, Mikhail this, Mikhail that, and all this kind of. And I was his patient, right? And we sat pretty close to each other where he set it up. It wasn't like he was sitting at a desk and I was on the other side of the desk. And he had this sheet of paper and a pen. He never took notes down. But so he says to me, after I give him my whole spiel, he says, what is anger? What do you mean? What are you talking about? What is anger? I just told you my story. And that was a big beginning for me to come into Buddhist philosophy. And then that carried on to Spirit Rock. At the very beginning, when Spirit Rock happened, we went every Monday night. We were there, and there was a whole community of people that came up around him, and it was a fascinating time. And this went on for a number of years, and then he married us. Jack did. At the altar of Spirit Rock. It was just the three of us. We sat by the altar and he sang some beautiful prayers, and it was an amazing experience being there with him. And then it was funny, he gave us as a wedding gift these Tibetan bells, right? And he said, I'm giving these bells as so you should ring them to remind you when you get into an argument, you get angry and so on. Okay. So during that first week, we were home. We had to use the bells. So when I saw him next time, but I told him, he says, already? It was funny. I guess you had to be there. Oh God.
That's why you're hearing.
Okay, here we go. Okay, while this is all happening, a dear friend of ours, Sandy, I was not working at this time. I had had a very bad experience in business working for a company, and it got me into a deep depression, and I was not doing too well. And so Sandy came to me this day, and she showed me this gold leaf. Okay, this is a real sugar maple leaf that has been processed and plated in gold. It's a very intricate process. It's done by a factory down in LA. That's what they're a production factory. It's all they do. And it's anyway, it's an extraordinary process. And so she came to me, she said, can you sell this for me? I said, let me think about it. And I came back to her the following day and said, you know, I'm not interested in just selling this. Why don't we start a business together? And that's what happened. We started this business. We didn't have any customers. Where should I go? So I thought of going, because it's nature and what have you. There was a chain of stores out of the Bay Area called Natural Wonders. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They had a lot of stores. And I called them, told them what I was doing, and asked if they would be able to give me an appointment. I just want to show it to them. It was serendipitous because this was the month of May. Most big companies have already bought up for their holiday season because it's the biggest money earner for them. And so it's important that they get it right. But apparently they didn't get it right with something, and they were looking for something. I went and had my meeting. I walked out. I'm just going to give it to you just to, you know, with an $85,000 order. And Sandy and I didn't have any money to start this company until then. And then we did it, and it started growing. We had a lot of friends working for us. The first year, in business, we were living on Golden Hind Passage, right? We had 14 people working in the house. We had, right? I remember that. By the end of that year, I was so stressed out. I mean, because it wasn't a home any longer. And so anyway, we moved into our own facilities, and we built that business. Within a few years, we were doing a lot of business. We were doing $1.5 million a year in maybe 2 to 3 years. And this was back in when was it? The 80s? Something, 90s, whatever. Okay. All right, well, but that's where I had trouble trying to remember the dates. And okay. And then fast forward 2008, the recession happened. And the business started going down. And within a certain period of time, it just wasn't happening any longer. We were still in business, but it was costing us too much money to live, and we weren't bringing in enough. And I went through a number of very severe depressions, some of which I wasn't functioning at all. And that was a very difficult time for our family. And Eric, at this time, he was on his way off to San Francisco State, I believe, or something like that. No, all right. No verification on that one. No verification. All right, where was I, honey?
2008, we're depressed because of
Okay. Well, fast forward, Eric and our daughter Harmony went to McHale and told her, you can't afford to live here anymore. We had our home in Corte Madera for 25 years. And they said, you just can't, you don't have the money to do it. I didn't have income coming in. The business was losing money. And so what was I going to do? You know, I don't remember how old I was, in my 60s, early, I don't, you know, something like that. And I was never going to go out and just get a regular job after this, everything I did in my life at that point. And so McHale, she took the bull by the horns. She went ahead, and we decided to sell our home to Harmony and her family, because they had bigger family than the two of us. There were five of them. And we had this big home, and so we sold it to them. And then she was scrambling around to look to see where we should live. This was going to be her decision because I was not capable of joining her in the decision process. So she heard from our dear friends, Robert and Mahalia, about Marshall and Timo, their home. They wanted to sell their home because they had another house that a friend of theirs was going to sell them that they really wanted to move to. Within an hour, according to, Mikhail decided, I'm going to do it. And she bought the place. So when I moved here, I never saw it, but I'll tell you, when I drove in, coming in Marin Valley Drive, I remember the first thing I noticed, it said Marin Valley Country Club. I said, country club? This is interesting. Because I had no idea what was happening here. And that was the beginning of my living here. And I want to say this. Then the pandemic happened, which kept us pretty isolated. So the pandemic was happening, so they were, we were pretty isolated. We were all, we didn't know what we were dealing with. All we know is, we're here, millions of people are dying, and right. So, okay. As time has, from that early period of being here, Mikhail is very outgoing in community life. So she met all of you folks. And she always said to me, you've got to meet the people in this community. And slowly and slowly, I have been meeting all of you. And, and I feel so welcomed here. And this is I'm 81. These are some of the happiest years of my whole life. And it's interesting when we're at this stage of life, and you can say that. I mean, also, I'm pretty fortunate that my health is good, and I'm able to take care of her. And I am grateful for all of you. I've come to this point in my life. There's two things are how I want to live: love and compassion. I have no bucket list. I have no dreams to travel around the world. Although we're hoping to go to Israel soon, in the next bunch of months, in the summertime or something, because our granddaughter is giving birth, and she lives in Israel, and so does her sister, and so does her father, and we know them all, and so that's the only trip plan, other than Limantor Beach. We still haven't been there since we're here. No, since we're living here. We were? Oh. I bring her along for well, I don't really have much more to say. It's been an interesting process, just thinking about your whole life. This is a great thing that you're offering to people in the community. And thank you.
Are you open to questions?
Sure.
I want you to go back to when you first came to Santa Barbara
Mhm.
and you were first exposed to California after living in the Bronx all this time, what's that? That was a shock, a different.
Shock. I settled in there in 2 seconds.
What did they think of you?
Yeah.
I'll tell you one day, I'm on State and Victoria Street. In those days, there were no fancy stores. You know, there were just little shops and what have you. And I remember I was standing on the corner. The light was red. There were no cars. So I walked across the street. I get halfway across, the cop says to me, "Where you going?" I said, "Oh, right there." He says, "You better get back." Because when you live in New York, you learn how to survive. So, any other questions? I'm happy to hear them.
Where was your store?
So, we didn't have a store.
I had a store. You didn't. You didn't have a store. Oh, I thought you worked with Sandy. Oh, that was, no.
That was wholesale manufacturing.
He made it sound like it ended in 28, but it didn't. It was still, well, we retired in 2019. Right. We still had a lot, but it wasn't as big as this thing.
She clears up any misstatements that I made. You just go to her.
In 2000, the Rices and I got together and she gave me as a gift, she brought it down to Fort Mason, one of those, and I still have it. And I brought it up to Michaela and Marty last week, and we're gonna rebuild it.
What happened to Sandy? I never missed that.
Well, when the business started failing, we just dissolved our partnership. I think we bought her out for a certain amount of money. And then she moved to, where did Jeffrey and Sandy move to?
Santa Fe.
Santa Fe, New Mexico. And they were very connected with the Ramdas community out of Taos. And had a lot of close friends there. And so that was a perfect situation for them, and that's where she is now.
Santa Fe or Taos?
She's in Santa Fe. I remember being at the Llama Foundation. Jack was teaching a retreat up there. And I was in a phone booth up there. We used to have to drink this green stuff, right? The chlorophyll, which I still do to this day. Because of the elevation we were in, it helped us to acclimate ourselves to that. And I remember Jack came over, he knocked on the door of the phone booth and what have you, and I opened it and he said, "Ramdas just had a stroke." And we were all very, touched by just hearing it. And he was extraordinary, I'll tell you. I saw him give a talk, the first talk he gave after he came back after the stroke at Spirit Rock. And I remember sitting there, it was outdoors, it's a bunch of people, I don't know how many, 200, 300. And he was sitting alone where he was going to be talking. And he had a very difficult time with his speech. And I remember sitting there and saying to myself, he's really teaching us right now about our own reaction to him not being the person he used to be, which the fact that was what got him, when he was one of the most beautiful, intelligent speakers that I've ever come across. He was brilliant. And he was so heartful. And he used to bring thousands of people up to the farm his parents had up in New Hampshire. They would see all these hippies coming on their land, the parent, you know, his parents. Anyway. So that's the whole spiel.
I have a sideways question. How old were Eric and Beth when you traveled across the country?
They were 5 and 7.
Do you remember that?
Not much.
Where is Harlan? Is she the one in Israel?
No,
No, she was here for my bio. Oh, and she lives nearby. Yeah. Yeah, she bought our house.
we're fortunate. Three of our families live and Nina live in the Bay Area. They live close to us. It's really nice to have that. Any other David? David?
Mark. Wow.
Oh, Mark. No wonder. That's my partner. My carpenter partner.
We're gonna sing a carpenter song.
We're gonna do what? Oh. Are you making it up or is somebody giving it to us? You made it, okay, we'll make a song.
My kids listen to the radio. I remember being quite well.
Uh-huh, okay.